Hi, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of Explicitly Pro-Life. I'm Kristan Hawkins, and today I'm asking the question, does hormonal contraception cause abortions? This is something that's very controversial throughout the world and throughout the United States, especially on college campuses where I've been speaking at. And sometimes it's even controversial within the pro-life movement. So today I have a special guest, Teresa Kenney. Teresa is a nurse practitioner at the Pope Paul VI Institute here in Omaha, Nebraska. This is where we're at today. And I've asked Teresa to come on to kind of have this discussion about contraception, about the side effects of contraception, because often when I'm on campuses and I kind of make that argument of, sex, contraception, abortion, that's kind of the cycle that Planned Parenthood, that deceptive business cycle that Planned Parenthood has created for children and young women. But it's kind of always new information. Like they've heard that abortion kills a human being, but then we talk about the negative side effects of contraception, whether or not it can be abortifacient or whether or not it can harm women. It always seems to be new information. And there's really not, I don't think, a good dialogue in our country about what contraception really does to women. In fact, there was a Good Morning America segment not long ago where a researcher from Baylor came on, talked about how she was started on contraception. Her, feelings towards her husband changed. She wasn't desiring him sexually. Her sex drive went down. All these things were happening in her life. So she realized, wait a minute, what have I done differently? Oh, I started hormonal birth control. She went off of it and everything went back to normal. So she started researching it and found like, oh my gosh, hormonal contraception is fundamentally altering women's brains and our decisions that we make. But no one wants to talk about it. And it was funny because even when she presented this information on the talk show, the other women, the women kind of hosts who were sitting opposite her on the couch all said, well, this is important information, but we're not saying birth control is bad. In fact, birth control is really good. And birth control has meant the liberation of women across America and across the world. And so even having this information that birth control, hormonal birth control, fundamentally alters our brains for the worse, we still can't even have an honest discussion about. So, Teresa, with that lead in, welcome to Explicitly Pro-Life.
Thank you, Kristan. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And I think to have this conversation, we have to go back to the beginning of birth control.
Sure.
So, I mean, birth control came out in 1961, right around there. And when it came out, of course, women were expecting it to change their lives, and doctors, were starting to prescribe it by the millions. It became a situation where it was very dangerous for women right away. Mm-hmm. And one of the significant side effects was blood clots. So many women in those early years died from birth control due to blood clots.
This is the pill.
And this is the birth control pill. Although any hormonal birth control, and even IUDs have hormones in them now, have the similar side effects, like even you're talking about as affecting the brain. But back then, again, if we're looking at it from the standpoint of abortifacient effect, doctors were starting to realize how birth control worked. And fundamentally, I mean, you can look at any physician's desk reference, you can look at any pill package, and the pill will tell you its mechanisms of action. It stops ovulation most of the time. And that's anywhere from 1% with a failure rate of 1% up all the way even to 30%, depending on how the patient takes the medication. So if a woman ovulates on the pill, then there's these two backup mechanisms that are there to stop pregnancy from potentially occurring. And that's that it thickens cervical mucus. And cervical mucus, and this is something that I talk about so much because a lot of women don't know how important cervical mucus is to actually get pregnant, but it stops a sperm from being able to get to the egg. And then it has a third backup mechanism, and that's that it changes and alters the lining of the womb or the uterine lining. And this is fundamental to the safety of every pregnancy, establishing in the uterus, is that it can implant. And it can stay there for 9 months throughout its pregnancy. So what the pill does is, in altering that lining of the uterus, if a sperm gets to an egg, in that failure of potentially spontaneous ovulation that we know happens on the pill.
Because people get pregnant,
exactly.
Women get pregnant on the pill. So
exactly.
We know spontaneous ovulation happens.
And we know, I mean, they've done very, very thorough scientific studies to show the changes that occur in the endometrium. So we know that there is a drastic change, not even from the thickness, but also in terms of like the blood production, the chemicals and proteins that would support a pregnancy, those are altered significantly. So if that fertilized egg embryo gets to the line of the uterus, then many times it just can't implant. And that's what we call the abortifacient effect of any hormonal contraceptive. Now, OBGYNs don't talk about that. Most people don't know about that. Most women aren't told that. There's not informed consent given that. And there's a significant reason why, and that's because in 1965, the definition of pregnancy was changed.
That's right.
So it really
we talked about this last week.
Yeah, it goes back to fundamentals and understanding when life begins. And in any embryologist textbook would tell you that a new human being begins when the sperm and the egg meet and form a completely unique, identified genetic human being at that moment. And everything else is a continuum in terms of our human life until we are, dead and buried in the ground. So that moment of life, again, at fertilization is not in the uterus. That is in the fallopian tube.
Yes.
And it takes 6 to 9 days for that little person to get inside the uterus and implant and make a home there for the next 9 months. What doctors who knew, that this potential backup mechanism was happening, this abortifacient effect of the pill, they worried that women would not want to be on the pill if they knew that. And so they changed the definition of when life begins, essentially. And this is why they don't talk about it, is because they say that pregnancy is not established or, your life isn't a beginning until you're implanted in that womb.
Which is simple geography.
Is simple geography, right? Yeah.
That's creating the status, saying the status of your personhood, your humanity, doesn't begin until you're a certain location,
right?
Which doesn't really make philosophical sense. You're a person no matter where you're located. You're a member of our human family no matter where you're located. So hormonal birth control can have this abortifacient effect. I think and you're right, it's not being talked about. Especially, someone who was raised in a Protestant in the Protestant church, it's definitely not talked about within the Protestant church. A lot of times, hormonal birth control is looked upon, abortion's looked upon negatively, unless you're in like a mainstream church that's kind of liberal in a lot of things and wrong on a lot of things. But the Protestant church largely would say, evangelicals would say, yes, abortion absolutely bad, birth control fine, because birth control doesn't kill a baby. But there's no education there. And I think it's a hard kind of conversation to have, because you're having to have some really heart-to-heart conversations with people, and they're having to reevaluate some of the decisions that they're making. But I think sometimes it's even easier, and usually where I start off with that conversation is, why would you put these dangerous artificial hormones into your body to begin with? Right. Regardless of whether or not it's abortifacient, because we know it's not always abortifacient. We don't actually know. I don't know if you know, but I've never heard a percentage of how many abortions could be taking place, because we don't see inside of every woman's uterus. We don't have like little cameras telling us what's happening. But we do know the dangerous effects of putting these artificial hormones in our bodies for decades. Can you talk about some of those effects you've seen?
And we're women, it's just a big experiment.
It is.
In the last over 50 years.
I can't imagine them doing this on men, by the way.
No.
Just to sound a little feministy.
No, and I think what's crazy is, of course, we come from a more of a philosophical perspective sometimes on this and looking at the effects of contraception. But in the secular world, people are waking up. And you mentioned the effects on the brain. I was just all weekend listening to a conference online called Taking Back Your Hormones. And this expert, she's a naturopathic doctor, Dr. Jolene Brighton, who wrote the book Beyond the Pill, interviewed like over 30 people about hormones. And it always, kind of came to the conversation of the pill and contraceptives and how they affect the body. These are people who wouldn't necessarily agree with us potentially on the birth control in terms of a wrong, or abortion as a wrong necessarily, but they are figuring out that for women's bodies, these hormones are dangerous. Hormones affect every system in our bodies. And these particular, chemicals that we're putting in our body, they're extremely potent. And we do not know the long-term effects of them. That's the facts. We do really not know in another 50 years, we're going to be starting to find out what we have done in terms of changing women's bodies and being on these medications. I mean, you hear stories, and I have heard stories of women that were on the pill for 16 years because their doctor put them on the pill when they were 16 for irregular periods. And think about it. You never knew yourself. Because our hormones make up who we are as an individual. They affect our emotions, they affect our personality, they affect who we choose as a mate. And in altering that, we're literally altering kind of who we are as a human being.
Wow.
And we're just starting to see the effects. There's studies now showing kind of, again, you mentioned just the effects that it has on intimacy, showing that, like, I mean, we've known this forever, but birth control basically sucks out your testosterone. And testosterone is the main hormone that causes sex drive. So women are taking birth control and not liking sex.
Yeah, they're taking birth control so they can have sex without any consequences is what they believe, but then it's actually making them not want to have sex.
I don't know how feminist that is. It certainly doesn't sound feminist to me. I mean,
it's the opposite of what they're intending.
So we've got all of these effects, and people don't know that it affects your gut microbiome. And the science around the gut microbiome is huge right now.
Yeah, everyone's talking about your gut.
Yeah.
Do you have a healthy gut?
Right. So the pill completely alters the gut microbiome. It increases yeast. So people start having yeast overgrowth. Women will start having more yeast infections. And it also causes nutrient depletion. So we lose nutrients like B vitamins, zinc, CoQ10, selenium, these really, really important nutrients to every sort of like cellular interaction in our body, which makes us unhealthier when we actually come off of the pill and actually want to desire pregnancy. Of course, there's the ones that people know, like the increased risk of blood clots. And really, honestly, Kristan, it comes down to informed consent. Listen, I mean, everybody can make their own choices in this country, and I'm never going to say, like, I'm not trying to take birth control away from people, but I'm saying that you deserve as a woman to be empowered and to have all the knowledge and education around something, and that is not happening.
Sure.
Women are not being educated fully about the risks of birth control, and again, we're learning so much more about it. We're really going to have like a 10-page kind of like, this is what really you're getting into, and if you decide to get into it, certainly that's your choice. But it's devastating to women to find this out. It's devastating for them to find out the fact that they didn't realize that they were going to lose their hair, gain weight, feel depressed on the pill. This is new research. We're finding out there was a big study in 2016 with 1.5 million Danish women, which linked birth control to depression.
That's right. It's the largest one ever.
Largest one ever. And it linked it particularly into the adolescent group. It increased significantly in adolescents up to 70% and tripled their risk of suicide attempt.
Which I just saw something from the CDC that was saying that teen suicide, teen depression is at the highest levels they've ever seen. And they don't know what's happening.
Yes, and here's another one. I mean, I could just keep going on, but if a young girl goes on the birth control pill, 16, even younger than that, she hasn't reached her full bone density at that point.
Oh my gosh.
And birth control will not allow her to get there. She will not allow to be able to get to her full peak bone mass because those birth control pills are, again, they're steroids, they're potent, and they're affecting that.
So are we seeing
long-term.
earlier osteoporosis?
Yes. And it takes, once you lose it, and every doctor knows this, it is a lot harder to bring it back. And the medications that we have to bring it back, they have their own kind of list of really bad side effects as well.
So when you have this discussion, so you're talking about the risks to a woman's body that she doesn't know of hormonal birth control, how it can be abortifacient. The next logical argument that you hear is, women need birth control. Women need birth control because they have irregular periods. They have polyovarian cyst, whatever, I don't know, PCOS, right? I always call it PCOS, so I don't have to know the name. There's all these things that happen in a woman's bodies that they need birth control. But the question that I always have is like, these are real problems that women are experiencing, but it's not a real solution. It's simply trying to mask or alleviate some of the symptoms that she's experiencing. So what do you guys do at Politics that's different? Or what do other pro-life OBGYNs who are like, hey, I can't just prescribe a pill that we know is going to has dangerous, harmful side effects. What do we actually do to help women?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is what I feel like is a travesty in women's health. the pill, which was, came out for one reason, to provide birth control. And all of a sudden, over the next 50 years, it becomes a panacea of treatment for everything you walk in the door as a woman, at your OBGYN's office. I mean, everything.
I know. I remember when I was newly married and I went to this OBGYN and I hadn't done my research to see if he was pro-life or I was just whatever. He's at Georgetown. It's a good, good practice. And I didn't want to go on birth control. And he kept scaring the crap out of me because he's like, well, then you need to start taking prenatal vitamins right now because you can get pregnant at any moment. I was like, And so, but when I went back home, I was like, man, that was a really good sales pitch because I wasn't even coming in with, an issue to explore. It was just, you're pregnant, you're now having sex. So therefore you have to go on birth control. Like there was like no like discussion. And the fact that I told him no, like then he started going through all of these like things of what, why I needed to be on birth control. But it was like, no, I don't need to be on birth control. Both my husband and I have like, what was your argument, right? That
I heard that story so many times where women were never going in wanting any of that. And like all of a sudden they're getting a sales pitch for it and they're walking out.
And I was like freaked out because he was like, well, here's your prescription for these high dose, prenatal vitamins. You have to start taking these right away because you can get pregnant at any moment. I was like, oh.
So I had a patient come into my office yesterday, a sweet, 18-year-old girl, and she had gone to her OBGYN because she had she had been having irregular cycles for quite a long time. So she was trying to figure out, what she could do about that. Goes to her OBGYN. She was alone. Her parents weren't with her. And without anything, she just said, I haven't had periods, they're coming like every 2 to 3 months. And the doctor just said, well, we can just, put you on the pill. No discussion about
what's
pill.
Actually happening.
And hey, maybe we should figure out what's wrong with your cycles. And I mean, I don't know what doctors go to med school for, but I'm pretty sure when you go to med school, you're supposed to figure out what causes disease. But for women, it's just this assumption that, it's a period problem. Hey, you're 18. You probably need birth control anyway. And
2 birds, 1 stone.
Exactly. And they gave her an HPV vaccine without her parents' consent, which in Nebraska, you have to be 19 in order to, be there taking a treatment without parental consent. So frustrating on a lot of levels. But so she came to me and I said, hey, listen, do you want to know what's wrong with your body? I mean, women, even at the age of 18, they're already wondering if they're going to be able to have a family someday. Mm-hmm. And they're smart enough to know their menstrual cycle has something to do with it. Mm-hmm. So, she's like, yeah, I'd like to know. Well, it's not that hard to figure out. I mean, we are equipped in medicine to figure out disease. The pill treats no disease. The pill does not get to the root cause of anything. It is a Band-Aid. And I have met so many... A dangerous Band-Aid, yes. And again, informed consent. Do women really, really get the opportunity to decide if this is the right treatment for them based on all of those side effects we talked about? No. And, what happens is that these girls get put on them when they're young, and then they're on them until they are married. Maybe they're married for 3 years, and then at the age of 25, 26, 27, maybe even older, then they come off and they decide they want to have their family. Well, guess what? The problem that they were put on the pill for was never addressed. It doesn't just go away magically on its own. Mm-hmm. And so many of these women now are in a paradox of fertility because they didn't go on the pill necessarily for birth control. They went on it for a medical reason, thinking that the pill was going to solve their medical problem. And now when they actually want to have a baby, they're stuck with a disease that was never treated. So yes, that's what I do.
Where are the class action lawsuits against these OBs? I'm not like a lawsuit type of person, but you would think that would be like, wait a minute, you've let me continue on for decades with this disease that hasn't been treated. And now I'm trying to have kids and that you never actually addressed what I came in for.
Yeah, and research in women's health, I mean, I always say it's become stagnant. I mean, we have big pharma kind of ruling everything, and where is the research to try to improve the quality of curing diseases in women's health? What we have now is like birth control, and then if you can't get pregnant, we have IVF. It's there's no in between that, those two things.
And they're making money the entire time.
Right. Yeah.
Someone is making money off you the entire time. So at Pope Paul John VI Institute, you guys, I want to talk about what you all do and why you guys were founded. So there was like this little document created called Humanae Vitae. Can you explain that?
Yeah.
And explain it in a way that our non-Catholic viewers will understand it, because
Right.
Catholics don't always do a really good job of explaining things in a way that our non-Catholic brothers and sisters can understand.
Yeah. Okay, so Pope Paul VI, he was poped up in the 1960s. In 1968, an encyclical came out called Humanae Vitae.
And what is an encyclical?
It's a profession of faith, basically. So it's not dogmatic.
Only the Pope can do it.
Yes, the Pope. It's basically declaring kind of that this is what we believe.
Okay.
And, many popes have wrote encyclicals throughout the years, very beautiful ones. So Humanae Vitae was something people were waiting for in a sense, because prior to that, there was a birth control commission at the Vatican that was put in place. In fact, Cardinal Carol Wojtyla was on that papal birth control commission. And in fact, a lot of people think some of the writings of Humanae Vitae kind of were worked on in cooperation with Pope Paul VI and then future Pope John Paul II. But this was super important because there was many theologians at the time that really felt like the Catholic Church was going to overturn the Church's teaching on birth control. And of course, many Protestant churches at that time had already done that. The Anglican Church was first, and then many Protestant churches. But that wasn't to say that it was just like, hey, birth control for everybody, everyone start having promiscuous sex. It was a very controlled thing where, Christian churches would say, no, in marriages, in marriages where there's reason to prevent pregnancy, maybe I guess a more concerning reason that birth control should be allowed. So, many people were waiting for this kind of encyclical. 1968, it comes out. And what it says in Humanae Vitae, it's not a very long document. Anyone can read it.
I encourage you all to Google Humanae Vitae and read it.
It's just such a simple thing to read. But basically it just says, Pope Paul says, I can't change this. It's not something to change, basically. It's not a rule per se that the church made up. It's not a rule that I have any authority to change, because this is who we are made as human beings. And it really gets down to what the inner life of God is, and then how we are created in his image. And when you start learning this, and this is what I would encourage any Protestant brothers and sisters, if you can read John Paul II's Theology of the Body. I've talked to many Protestants who started reading Theology of the Body and were like, whoa. then you really start to get Humanae Vitae, because it's not, again, if we look at it as some sort of rule that was supposed to be changed or not supposed to be changed, that's not it. The key is what does it mean when we say we are created in the image of a divine creator? And if you can get to the heart of that question, you'll never believe contraception is right. Because in marriages, what the spousal union is a revealing of the inner life of God. And believe me, contraception has nothing to do with revealing the inner life of God. But that's what it professed. It was a beautiful document, but it was like a time bomb that went off at that time, and there was a lot of dissent toward it. Now Dr. Thomas Hilgers, who founded the St. Paul VI Institute, was a medical student at that time. And he was in the pro-life movement, but again, people really didn't know what to believe about birth control. It wasn't even something they thought about. He heard about Humanae Vitae, wanted to read the document. He went to a priest. He was at St. John's University in Minnesota. He went to a priest and said, hey, I heard this encyclical Humanae Vitae was released. I'd like to read it. And
this is pre-internet days, by the way.
Yeah. And the priest said to him, why would you want to read that trash? So there was an immediate,
So there was a problem with the Catholic universities even then.
Yeah. So if people think that there was, that this was all like everyone wanted to get on board with this. It wasn't the case. Which made Dr. Hilgers want to read it more.
Sure.
It's like a little kid being like, don't read that. Well, I'm going to go read it then. So he read the document, it changed his world. And so then he moved into the idea that we need to, if we're going to say that, this thing called birth control is not what is the right thing to do, that really it affects, again, this beautiful marital thing, this union that we have between spouses. What can we give them? Because we know the rhythm method, wasn't effective in terms of family planning. And so what Dr. Hilgers did is spent years and years after that researching modern natural family planning, fertility awareness-based methods, and bringing the level of science up to where it is today, which means that, you know, if you want to use a natural method to achieve or avoid pregnancy, you can do that and have the same effectiveness as birth control. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, that natural, it's funny because I've been looking at that Natural Cycles app on, there's FEM, there's a couple other ones. And Natural Cycles, it's a secular, I don't think the person who, I think she's Swedish or.
Right, neuroscientist out of Sweden.
Neuroscientist. And they're saying, even Natural Cycles is saying, if you use our app, and it's a holistic method, it's a 93% effectiveness rate.
Yeah, and it's FDA approved.
It's the
only birth control that's a natural method that is FDA approved.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, that's like the same efficacy rate as the birth control pill.
Yes. Yeah, and then they're not the only one. We've got the Creighton model system.
That's right. That's what Dr. Hildrers developed.
We've got the Marquette method. You know, we've got the symptothermal method. We've got the Billings ovulation method.
There's all a lot of them.
But again, there's options for people.
Right. There's absolutely options.
And any woman again who, I don't know a lot of women who want all the side effects of the pill. Again, what the problem is most women fear not being able to have that kind of ability to know when they are going to have their children.
It's a control.
Yes.
They feel like the birth control pill gives them control over their lives, right?
Right.
They can choose when they want to have children.
So that fear basically prevents them from being open. And then, of course, they hear and they don't know the science behind modern methods of natural family planning. So they're like, well, this is all I can do then. And once you educate them, I mean, there is nothing more feminist than a woman understanding her body.
Yeah. Women are literal superheroes.
Right.
Right? We can gestate, we can lactate, we menstruate. 3 things that men will never be able to do.
And guess what? You can only get pregnant really in this tiny window every menstrual cycle. You cannot get pregnant every day. And I'm
despite
like,
what my OB told me when I first got married, I was not just like this walking almost pregnancy time bomb that's going to go off.
Right. And this is why, again, like my passion is like going in, you know, if I could get into every high school and just talk to young women about their bodies, that's the whole start of this. Yeah. Is like empower women to know themselves. Yeah. And when they walk into a doctor's office, they're going to be like, you know what? You know, before I do that, I kind of actually know my body. So let me tell you about what I think is probably going to be best. If you are completely ignorant of how your body works, of how your fertility works, then you are just a guinea pig sitting there waiting for somebody to just be like, you have to do this. And that's what most women feel like. And then they're angry 30 years down the road when nobody told them, again, the pill didn't fix their problems, or they've got massive amounts of endometriosis that nobody fixed. And this is, you know, every day in my work.
And then it goes into the assisted reproductive technologies, so you've got Creighton, and you have all these other natural, you know, green birth control. If that's how the term we use on college campuses, not natural family planning.
Right. No,
that sounds too Catholic or scary, I guess. So you have this green alternative method, but then you've got women who are coming off of the pill or some hormonal IUD or whatever. By the way, IUDs are really, really bad. That's not a pro-life alternative. Some people are like, oh, copper IUDs are okay because they don't have hormones. Google copper IUDs and side effects.
Or just remember, as a woman, it's really not logical to implant a foreign device inside your body.
And your body doesn't like foreign devices implanted inside
of
itself.
It's not comfortable.
Yeah.
I mean, just...
okay. So they can have a whole episode on just the IUDs. But so the women are coming off of these pills or these devices, and then they're trying to get pregnant, and then they can't get pregnant. So that is something that Dr. Hildrers has also addressed.
Yeah. So what was crazy is once he established this whole thing called the Creighton model system to help couples achieve or avoid pregnancy, then he's like, wow, look at this. I have a gold mine of information about women's bodies. And that led into something called NaPro technology, which is really finding the underlying root cause of disease. And we have couples come to us from all over the country, all over the world, to try to figure out what's causing their infertility.
And I believe NaPro actually you actually have a higher success rate than IVF.
Yes. In fact, I was just on the CDC just to kind of review where IVF is at, just to make sure things haven't changed. IVF basically has, if you're over the age of 35, you have a less than 20% chance of having a baby with your own egg. So
with
if you want
IVF.
Yes. I mean, like most couples want a biological child, you know, they're from their own.
That's why they're using IVF and not seeking adoption.
But if you're over the age of 35, I mean, the chances of that are pretty dismal. If you're under the age of 35, your chances are around about 25 to 37%. for IVF.
And how much do you pay for IVF? Like
Anywhere from 10 to 20,000. It's in that range. So most people, it's an average of 15 to 16,000. So yeah, it's a lot of money. And of course, you're not going to get pregnant necessarily on your first try. So we're not talking 15,000 for 5 tries. Yeah. We're talking $15,000 per try. Okay. Now, NaPro technology, completely different. What we are trying to do is actually be doctors. We're trying to figure out why they're infertile. And there are many reasons for that. It's not an easy thing. It's a complex issue. Mm-hmm. But one of the biggest things is that nobody looks for the problem. It's like, being a doctor is kind of being a detective. Yeah. We have to like look under different stones and we have to figure out why you're not having these problems. And so many times it's just that IVF doctors, they might do like 1 stone, maybe another half a stone, but then it's like, we're not going to do the rest of it and we're just going to go to IVF. And again, it doesn't work. So NaPro technology, if you try to figure out what the disease is, if you let no stone be unturned and you come up with a plan that really, really is cooperating with her body, mm-hmm. the chances of that couple getting pregnant are now 60 to 80%. Yeah, you heard that right. 60 to 80% in comparison to maybe 20 to 35%.
Why isn't this on the evening news? I mean, infertility is a huge problem mm-hmm. in our country. There's so many couples desperate to have a child.
Absolutely.
They're going to these unregulated, wild, wild west IVF clinics, which, by the way, like there's nothing more unregulated in America than abortion clinics and IVF clinics. They're taking all of this money, and it's painful, and they're not getting any results. And then here you all are sitting here in Omaha with something that's getting 60 to 80% efficacy, which I doubt you're charging women $15,000.
Well, most of our treatments are covered by insurance.
Because they're actual treatments for the reason that they're having infertility.
Right. So people come to us, and it's not just that we're having higher success rates for pregnancy. We are actually giving women cure of disease, answers, and women appreciate we don't have 100% success rate. If we ever get there, that would be amazing. But that's a hard thing to do.
Sure.
But if a woman doesn't have a child, do you know how much better she feels knowing that she actually knew why?
Yeah.
And that's
she
huge.
did everything possible. Yeah.
So this is where women, again, it's all about, again, we need informed consent, we need empowerment, we need education, we need knowledge about these things, because it's her right to choose what's best for her body. Mm-hmm. And I think with most women, if you put this in front of them and you tell them, hey, listen, I've got this compared to that, women want to have their babies naturally. Mm-hmm. And when we treat couples, what we do is we first give them the knowledge about their bodies. Again, that thing called cervical mucus. Do you know how many women don't know how important cervical mucus is? That is the one thing besides having a sperm and an egg that you absolutely have to have in order to have a baby. And women go their whole lives not really knowing what that stuff in the middle of their cycle is, which is the main event of your cycle. The period is just the after event. Mm-hmm. And if we start educating women about their bodies, and I've looked at IVF. I've had people go to IVF doctors and then come to me. And so I'll ask them questions about, what did the doctor tell you in terms of when you should have intercourse to try to have your baby? And they'll pull out a calendar, like a copy of a calendar, and they show me these big X's on the days. And it's basically every other day. I'm like, again.
Where did these doctors go to medical school?
It would be just so much easier if you would just tell them to have intercourse on the days that they can make a baby, where that's possible, which again,
I mean, the husband may not like that. He might like the every other day cycle.
Right. Yeah, he might. But when you have infertility, sometimes the stress of even having intercourse makes you not really desire. It becomes so much almost like a hassle, but that's a whole nother topic. But, again, let's just use science on our behalf.
It's 2019.
Yeah.
Like, why are they? Yeah.
The pro-life movement has science on their sides in every aspect. And not just from the work that we're doing for abortion, but this aspect too of what's best for women's bodies.
That's right.
Again, if I really thought birth control was something that really cured women, that made them feel amazing, at least have an appreciation for why women would want to take it. Mm-hmm. But that's not the case. I mean, we're looking at a society where women are giving themselves medications that do damage short-term, that do damage potentially long-term, and we have no idea really what the next 50 years look like.
And they're not being cured.
Mm-hmm.
They're not being cured. That's what drives me crazy when you think about birth control and we're talking about IVF is we're not ever looking for cures here. We're just trying to come up with some crappy half-ass solution. And these solutions are harming women. They're causing more damage than when they came into the clinic in the first place. And it's just like the cycle of also just not respecting human life as well. Because we look at why do we have contraception and what is contraception's intended effect, and that it's having this abortifactive effect. We know for sure Plan B is abortifactive. We know Ella is definitely abortifactive, and you can look on the back of their boxes, and I tell people go Google image the back of these boxes or look them up next time you're at Walmart. We know hormonal birth control can have this effect of being a potentially abortifacient. And then you look at IVF, and you have so many Christians who are pro-life, they're against abortion, who donate to pro-life organizations, but then are pro-IVF. And they've never had a discussion of what happens in IVF. That you're taking sperm and egg, you're uniting those two parts to make a whole unique living human being in a petri dish. And you're not usually just creating one. Now there was one IVF researcher emailed me and told me she's a pro-life IVF researcher. She only creates one embryo at a time, only implants one embryo at a time. But everybody else is creating multiple embryos. They're screening out embryos. So children like mine who have cystic fibrosis, those are thrown away or they're donated for research. Other children are being frozen. The parents get to pick the gender. They can do whatever they want. They can pick the eye color of their child. It's eugenics that's happening within that petri dish. And so there's all of these things that are happening, and you can see it leading up.
It's funny because in the IVF world, with the frozen embryos, you'll hear about lawsuits or cases.
There was just one 2 weeks ago
where couples are fighting over their embryos. One couple wants to get rid of them, one wants to save them. That in and of itself, again, if we can just think about why would anybody care if those embryos have value, then people care about them. They're their babies. I mean, they know that they're their babies.
That's right.
But yet in society, we kind of still take this kind of nonchalant, but you can still freeze them for the rest of eternity. And, I guess the thaw or de-thawed, and now we've lost all those babies. And, sorry.
The court is now considering property. So there was a case 2 weeks ago in Connecticut where it was a divorce. And I think there was a husband was petitioning the court for the embryos that they had created and they had frozen. Though I think the wife wanted them destroyed. And the judge ruled the embryos are property of the marriage. Therefore, the marriage has been dissolved. Therefore, the embryos should be destroyed. I mean, this is like, when in human history has it ever been a good thing to label another human being as someone's property? This is what happens in an act of abortion. I had a girl at Villanova recently who said she started off telling me how much sex she's having, and the 3 points of sex, the 3 purposes of sex is unification, procreation, and pleasure. I was like, I don't think pleasure was in the Bible, but okay. And then so she started off telling me how she was having sex, and like, how dare me say if you don't want to have a baby with someone, you maybe shouldn't have sex with them. So she was angry about that, but she was like, I'm a biology major, blah, 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 blah. But I got her to eventually admit that she believes that the human being inside of the mother is the mother's property. And I was like, I actually rebutted. I probably should have rebutted. Probably made for a better video. But I just kind of looked at the audience and was like, there you go.
Yeah.
She just summed up. Like, when has that ever been a good idea to call someone else and label someone else your property? And that's what happens with IVF is the embryos are someone's property. Either they're the property of the marriage, they're the property of the clinic. And that's a very dangerous, slippery slope. But it's hard because there's so many people who struggle with infertility, who say, I actually had a friend from college text me, and she'd read something that I had written against IVF, and very upset because she considers herself pro-life, against abortion. She just wants to have a child. Her and her husband are desperate to have a child. And she said, I love all of the embryos we've created. I know they're my children. And it's so hard to have that discussion with someone of, maybe you shouldn't have gone down that route. I know you deeply want to have biological children, but maybe there was somebody else, like a Pope Paul John VI, that you could have gone to kind of figure out what's actually happening here. And are you truly infertile, or is there a disease that can be treated, that you can be cured from, and then you can have children? I don't know. Do you have a good, I haven't found like a really great response other than, yeah, it's still wrong. Like, I know you're pro-life, and I'm glad that you treat those embryos. You believe you're treating those embryos you've created as children. You love them, and you've ordered that they not be destroyed, but you still have created life, and you've got those lives frozen.
Yeah, it's super complex, and we're walking around now with 8 million people created.
Yeah.
So it's hard, because if you say IVF is wrong, you're basically, what you're saying to the people that did IVF is something's wrong with their children. And that's not what we're saying.
No.
It's that, being pro-life is meaning that children deserve the same rights and the same values that we do as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And no one deserves to be treated as property, and everyone deserves to come into this world in a way that dignifies the human person.
That's right.
And it's a hard thing, but I do think when you start to help people understand, the slippery slope of IVF, no one wants to have frozen embryos. So what you do is you share with them the good news about that's really unnecessary. You didn't have to go that length. Now, that's where couples, men, women, need to speak up. Again, we're in a point in society where using your voice is allowed, and it happens all the time. So
we can still
up.
do it, by the way. We'll see after 2020's election if we can still use our voice, but yes.
Yeah, you're right. Speak up and share that you deserve more. You deserve better than just being told that you have to kind of, use your body like a machine in some way. That was one of the predictions of Pope Paul VI, is that we would use our bodies as machines, and we would start to treat the human person as an object.
I know.
That's exactly what happened.
A lot of the predictions that are made in Humanity Today, it's like, oh, yep, that happened. Because I think he talked about birth control leading to abortion. Yep. I mean, and we know that. I remember the first time as a Protestant, I heard someone say that to me. I was like, that's crazy. Birth control didn't lead to abortion. And you're like, no. You read Roe versus Wade, and in Roe versus Wade, they directly cite Griswold. It was the Supreme Court's decision to allow contraception within marriages, and then 1972 outside of marriages. They made that case for the right to privacy. So legally, birth control paved the way for abortion, but also in people's minds, that contraceptive mentality, once that's the thing that it's the most shocking thing I'm saying on campuses this semester, by the way, is if two heterosexuals consent to sex and enter into a consensual sexual relationship, they're consenting that a unique human life might be created. That is like the most shocking thing I can say, because our generation has been told that, sex doesn't equal babies. Birth control stops the baby. And that's why abortion is needed, because I've been on birth control. I did everything right. I shouldn't be pregnant. I have to go get this taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's written in, I think, that Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that abortion is basically needed as a backup to failed birth control.
Yeah, because we
know it's going to fail.
Yeah.
And it fails more in the populations that everybody wants to help, which is the racial groups and the poor.
Yep.
And if you think about it, you wonder why that is. I mean, a lot of people say that's lack of access to contraception, the cost of it, those things. Maybe it's because the motivation to use those things isn't there because they don't have what we have. That they're in a situation where they don't have access to higher life, education, and great careers and insurance and those things. And so they're sitting there and they're like, well, I just don't have a lot of motivation. And it ends up their contraception, they just don't, they don't use it the same way. It's that cycle of poverty So what I'm saying is the answer is not more contraception, more abortion. The answer is let's get those groups of people better care. More opportunity for education.
Let's actually educate.
Let's actually fix
women.
the problems instead of using abortion as a
That's right.
Kind of way to kind of mask all of these issues that we have.
Well, Teresa, we have to get going, but I want to. Where does everyone kind of get more information about NaPro technology, and really your all's action item from this episode is that you need to go tell everybody you know, every couple you know is struggling with infertility, about NaPro technology. Every young married couple, every young girl you know who's having trouble with her menstruation or periods or cycles, tell her about Creighton. So where can people go? What kind of website should they find?
Yeah, so
at?
if you go to NaPro, it's NaPro technology.com. That'll take you to the science behind naprotechnology.com. You can go to popepaulvi.com as well. That's our homepage. And we're not the only people doing this. We've trained thousands of people to do NaPro technology. And so you may have a NaPro provider in your area. And to get that list, you can also go to fertilitycare.org to find a doctor in your area that knows about NaPro technology. Omaha is kind of the hub. This is where it's all started. So certainly we have the most specialty in infertility. Come and see us if you've been struggling. Again, the goal is we really want to help women. We want to help couples really achieve their family dreams. So we're here for you.
Yeah, and there's hope for you. And that's what I love about this, is there is hope. That you don't have to take that infertility diagnosis. Like, there's somewhere else you can go for help. And I love that. So thank you for what you're doing here in Omaha. And thank you to Dr. Hilders for being that visionary leader, and who's been so generous with his leadership of, spreading the knowledge and not just kind of hoarding it here in Omaha, of spreading it across America and across the world. And you all spread the word about natural family planning, Creighton model, all the other models of natural family planning, and NaPro technology, because we need to be shouting this from the mountaintops, that there is another way. There's another way for women. So thanks so much for tuning in this week to Explicitly Pro-Life. Make sure you spread the word about the podcast to get other people to sign up, and you can subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Thanks, guys.